These slides will review Immanuel's Safe Church Policy, updated in May of 2015. If you have not already read the policy, please feel free to pause the video so that you can read through each section before continuing on. The first section covers Immanuel's policy for safe ministry with children and youth, which explains the reasoning for our policy. This is the only slide I will read directly from, as it clearly explains why we created this policy for our church. The introduction states, Immanuel Lutheran Church is committed to being a safe haven for children and youth, a place where children and other vulnerable persons are protected from all forms of exploitation and abuse. We believe that God has called us to create a community of faith where children and adults can participate together in ministry in a safe and secure environment. We therefore adopt this policy for the protection of children and prevention of abuse in our church. The next 11 slides will go over the purpose for establishing this policy. As a volunteer or staff member of Immanuel, we feel that it is our responsibility to have set procedures in place to allow all members the physical and emotional safety in order for spiritual growth. Our policy states 7 reasons for establishing it. The first is to provide a safe and secure environment for the children and youth of our congregation. The next is to provide standards and procedures for hiring those who will work with Immanuel's children and youth. We also want parents and staff to be satisfied that our volunteers are equipped to work with others. In case of any abuse or inappropriate behavior, we need to have a system that allows for a quick and complete response for the victim, their family, and the accused. We reduce the possibility of false accusations by having guidelines for pastors, employees, and volunteers to follow. Immanuel's insurance company requires that we have a safe church policy and that our volunteers and staff are trained. Lastly, we want to follow all the guidelines while maintaining an environment where people feel trusted and respected. The conclusion for Immanuel's policy for safe ministry with children and youth states that, as a Christian community of faith, we pledge to conduct the ministry of the gospel in ways that assure the safety and spiritual growth of all of our children, youth, and workers. We will carefully select workers, be sure that they have safety procedures to follow for programs and events, offer training and expectations for volunteers and staff, have procedures in place for reporting incidents or abuse, and be prepared to respond to media inquiries if necessary. Immanuel's Safe Church Committee meets annually to review this policy and any incidents that may have occurred over the previous year. The next section of Immanuel's Safe Church Policy goes over the procedures for safe ministry with children and youth. These procedures must be followed by workers in order to protect all those involved in our youth ministries. Section A covers the guidelines for hiring and recruiting workers. All volunteers and employees are required to complete a participation covenant. These forms are available online as well as at the church. When you receive this form, you will need to read the top half. Then on the bottom half, you'll answer questions 1 through 6 and sign and date the form. And be aware that all volunteers and employees are strongly encouraged to confidentially share with a pastor of this congregation any personal experience as a victim of child abuse. Volunteers must be active in Immanuel's congregation for at least 6 months prior to working with children and youth. All volunteers and employees must pass a CORI check before working in youth ministries. Once the CORI result is returned with satisfactory results, you will be given an approved volunteer badge that is valid for 3 years. Your CORI check will need to be renewed after 3 years. The CORI form is available on Immanuel's website and at the church. You must sign and date page 1 of the CORI acknowledgement form and fill out the information on page 2. Then, a copy of your license will need to be filed with the completed form. Anyone with a prior conviction of child abuse will not be eligible to work with children or youth. If the pastor is aware of other at-risk behaviors in a potential volunteer, the pastor will discourage that individual's participation in youth ministries, as well as keep the information confidential. As required by Massachusetts state law, all paperwork regarding Cori checks will be kept in a locked file at Immanuel, and all information will remain confidential. Section B covers the guidelines for providing a safe environment. Immanuel will offer training for volunteers working with children and youth. The New England Synod also offers an informative Safe Church training video by Pastor William Barter. There is a link to that video on our website. All adults volunteering to work with youth must be at least 18 years old. The primary volunteer for any activity or event must be at least 21 years old and at least 5 years older than the oldest child participating. For example, if you are leading an event for high school-aged teens and your oldest teen is 17 years old, the primary volunteer must be at least 22 years old, 5 years older than the 17-year-old. There must be a minimum of 2 approved adult volunteers for youth events and activities. Requiring 2 adult chaperones allows for 1 adult to care for an emergency situation, while the other adult can care for the remaining group. For youth through age 12, there must be at least 1 adult chaperone per 6 children, while still maintaining the guideline for a minimum of 2 chaperones. For example, if you have 5 children come to an event, you must have at least 2 adult volunteers. If you have 13 children come to an event, you will need at least 3 adult volunteers. For youth aged 13 to 18, you must have 1 adult per 8 teens, still maintaining a minimum of 2 chaperones. For instance, if you have 7 teens come to an event, you will need a minimum of 2 adult volunteers. If you have 17 teens at the event, you'll need a minimum of 3 adult volunteers. All drivers for Immanuel's youth events must be at least 25 years old, and everyone in the car must use their seatbelt. A first aid kit and a copy of each child's permission form must be taken along on events that leave Immanuel's property. Both will be available for events on Immanuel's property. For overnight events, girls and boys will sleep in separate rooms. A minimum of 2 women will need to stay with the girls and 2 men with the boys. This means that for overnight events that include both boys and girls, you will need a minimum of 4 adult volunteers to remain with the youth during the night. Avoid one-on-one situations when working with children and teens. This will help prevent the possibility of false accusations. This one should be pretty obvious, but it needs stating anyway. Do not hurt a child in any way, physically or emotionally. No hitting, name-calling, threatening, etc. Discipline should be done with compassion so that the child knows that you care, but that you do expect appropriate behavior from them. Any problems should be reported to the child's parents in a supportive manner. In order to participate in youth ministry activities and events, each child must have a signed permission form that includes emergency information. This form is available on Immanuel's website and at Immanuel and must be filled out once per year. The completed original forms will remain at Immanuel, but a completed copy for each child participating must be taken on trips in case of an emergency. You will find allergy, parent contact, and insurance information on these forms. Also, permission to administer any emergency medical treatment if necessary. Do not post photos of youth without written permission from a parent. If you aren't sure if a parent has given permission, please check with the office. Use caution when choosing to post personal photos with other children in them on social media. And it will be in the best interest of the child to avoid using identifying information. As a volunteer leader, it is your responsibility to be sure the surrounding environment is safe. If you see that something in the area is a danger, fix the problem or find another safe area for the children. And you must be sure that the children or youth have proper supervision at all times. Don't let them wander off to a different or separate area than your group is meeting. Rather, keep the group together in a common area where everyone can be seen. If an injury to a child under the age of 18 occurs on church property or at a youth ministry event, it must be reported on an incident report form. This form should be filled out at the time that the incident occurred. The incident report form is online and at Immanuel. It is fairly simple to fill out. First, fill out the date, time, and location. Then fill out who was involved and what happened. List the name of the adult in charge, and finally have the parents sign the form when they pick up their child. Do fill out the form if the child hits their head and needs ice. There is no need to fill out a form if the child gets a paper cut and needs a Band-Aid, but do mention it to the parent. The parent should be given a copy of the completed form, and the original should be turned in to a member of the Safe Church Committee for review. During the Sunday school hour, classroom activity will be monitored. If possible, leave classroom doors open. Everyone working with children should plan to participate in annual training sessions to review Immanuel's policies and procedures. The volunteer covenant must be renewed and signed every 3 years. Immanuel's insurance company requires that volunteers and employees complete Safe Church training and sign off that they have done so. By signing this form, you agree that you have read and will follow the Safe Church policy, filled out the Corey form and participation covenant, and completed Safe Church training. This form can be found on Immanuel's website and at Immanuel. Section C covers the basic procedures for responding to allegations of abuse. These procedures are put in place in case there is an allegation of child abuse made against a volunteer or staff worker at Immanuel. At the time of an allegation, the child's parents will be notified immediately. Use contact information to call them. The victim will be led to a secure area, possibly an office. And until the child's parents arrive, the child will be supervised by 2 adults that were not involved in the incident. The alleged abuser will be notified of the allegation immediately. If the alleged abuser is a minor, his or her parents will also be notified immediately. At the time of the allegation, this person will no longer be allowed to participate in programs involving youth. The church council will review the case and make final decisions. The senior pastor will be notified of the abuse allegation immediately. The pastor will decide if authorities need to be notified. Any person with responsibility for the care of children is required to make a report to the Department of Children and Families if they have reasonable cause to suspect child abuse or if they have observed conditions that would reasonably result in child abuse. The senior pastor will serve as the only media spokesperson. Do not respond to a reporter. The identities of the child, child's family, and alleged abuser will be kept confidential. The senior pastor will prepare a statement to inform the congregation, still protecting the identities of those involved. If a pastor is accused of abuse, the New England Synod office will be notified immediately, and the bishop's office will assume the responsibilities of notifications. These are links to ELCA's New England Synod's Safe Church resources and training video. You can also find the links on Immanuel's website. Please take the time to watch Pastor Barter's video. He is an expert in this area, and it is a very informative video. The Safe Church policy and all forms can be found on Immanuel's website, as well as at the church. Thank you for volunteering to work with children and youth at Immanuel, and for taking the time to learn about Immanuel's Safe Church policy.